and it's really only a matter of time before results are known. But with tomorrow, the main day, we are joined by two leading minds in the associated yes and no campaigns for their final thoughts. Here in our Melbourne studio, I'm pleased to welcome the no campaigner and Liberal Senator James Paterson, and also Emma Webster, who supports the yes campaign and has experience working in Aboriginal affairs, both in the past as an advisor for the Victorian Government and the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria. It's great to have you both in here on a Friday afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
I want to start with you, Emma. How does the nation come together no matter this result tomorrow night?
Yeah, look, well, I guess there are two options. If it is a yes result, that is a massive step forward for reconciliation, and then it goes to the Parliament, and that's where James comes in, and there'll be various committee processes and, consultation to figure out what that looks like. If it's a no, look, I think it'll be a massive step back in terms of reconciliation. I was speaking to a Victorian Indigenous leader earlier today, and she said the biggest question she had on her mind is if it is a no, how she's going to wake up on Sunday and explain that to her children.
James, it seems, even hearing from Emma, there is a lot of work no matter which result happens tomorrow, isn't there? Particularly for the Parliament.
I think that's right, Simon, and it's really critically important for our country that whatever the result is, that we respect the result, whether our side is successful or not, that we accept that Australians have voted for their own reasons validly to decide whether or not they want to do this. I'm anxious, though, that we don't overinterpret what this result means. There's been some commentators who've been saying this week that it will be a rejection of Indigenous Australians or it'll be a statement about how we don't value Indigenous Australians, and I think that's a really dangerous and irresponsible thing to say. What it will be if it's a no result will be that Australians have decided that they don't want to include this particular proposal in the Constitution and nothing more. There's actually a lot of goodwill, I think, among all Australians for Indigenous Australians and an agreement that their circumstances desperately need to improve. And whether it's a yes or a no, it will still be the task of the Australian Government to continue to work on that problem and to do so in a constructive way.
Emma, there's obviously still a live referendum happening right now. Do you think there's an appetite to go to the nation again with another question if there's a need to? Even if it goes to a yes thing, it's going to take a bit to get Indigenous affairs right?
Well, look, I think the economic climate at the moment isn't favourable to a referendum. But let's look at the opportunity we have in front of us right now. For the first time in history, every Australian has the opportunity to vote yes to close the gap. They themselves can work to do that. They don't have to rely on governments to do it, to continue investing money on the same things without any results. In fact, a lot of measures are going backwards. We all have that opportunity tomorrow to make things better.
James, do you think, as Emma mentioned, the economic climate at the moment is a factor in this referendum? And I think we saw this morning the cost of living is playing a bit of a part too in people's minds as they go to the ballot box.
There's been some really good research on this by pollsters asking people, why are you voting the way you are? And everyone has their own reasons. But overwhelmingly what you can see in both the people who are voting yes and people who are voting no are actually for principled reasons. People who are voting yes have their reasons and they're very sincere about that, and I respect that and recognise that. But people who are voting no have principles as well that they're very concerned about. And the centre of our campaign has been the idea that this will divide our country. And I think actually the referendum campaign has shown how divisive it already is. And the idea that our Constitution should treat all of us equally, that we should be equal before the law, and that all Australians should be represented by the Parliament. There shouldn't be a separate representative body for some Australians based on their ancestry or their heritage. I think that's a really important principle which is going to drive a lot of the vote. Yes, maybe economic conditions are driving some of it, but I think overwhelmingly it's for principled reasons.
Emma, your final, pitch, if you will. Why do you think Australians should be voting yes?
So if we're looking at it from a public policy perspective, we know that when Aboriginal people are put in the driver's seat, when they get to take charge of decisions that impact them, we get better results, we save money, we actually get better outcomes. Let's actually listen to Aboriginal Australians for once and stop wasting money and just get on and vote yes. And when it comes to the Constitution, New Zealand's recognised in the Constitution, but our First Peoples aren't. So let's just do it.
Yeah, and New Zealanders are going to the polls themselves tomorrow. James, your final pitch?
If this was just about recognition, I think it would pass overwhelmingly, but it's about much more than that, and it's our constitution. And I think we have to tread very, very carefully, because history's shown changes to the constitution are permanent and they do involve a level of legal risk. All Australians want the circumstances of our fellow Indigenous Australians to improve, but I agree with Jacinta Price, I agree with Warren Mundine, I agree with Kerry-Ann Little. This is not the way to do that. There's nothing to stop the government tomorrow from listening better and consulting more with Indigenous Australians about the policies that affect them. You don't need a referendum, you don't need to spend nearly $500 million of taxpayers' money on a public vote to do that. There's no excuse for not doing that after this referendum is finished, and I hope that whatever the result, that governments work in a collaborative partnership with Indigenous Australians to prove their circumstances. And I think we can do that without taking any constitutional risk or without dividing our country.
You'll both be out on the pre-polls, or, well, sorry, the actual polls tomorrow, I imagine?
Sure will.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
from 8 to 6.
All right, wow. It's an opportunity for Australians to vote. Emma Webster, James Patterson, thanks so much for coming in. Really appreciate your insights. Really, thank you so much.
Thanks,
Simon.
you.
And Sky